Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And with this one, I wanted to go over my 5 types of WoW players. 9.2's announcement is coming tomorrow. We've seen massive interviews and talks about how feedback is going to be dealt with from Ian himself moving forward. And I think that 9.2's announcement is where we need to see, is the shift actually going to happen? And will this kind of be a moment to revitalize the game and bring players back and restore our enjoyment of World of Warcraft fully? So what I wanted to cover was the 5 types of players, to kind of go into more specifics of what in that interview I tried to pull out, which was that they want to take feedback from the wide variety of players that play the game, which makes sense because people play WoW for different reasons, and they all have their kind of different loops, right? Their different schedules and what they're prioritizing based on those schedules. So that is what I wanted to talk about when I go into this video. I think the main philosophy that it's kind of a tough one, whether or not it's been holding the game back or pushing it forward. And I think that philosophy is that WoW is WoW, which means that if you play World of Warcraft, you do everything. You're doing all of the endgame systems that are new to an expansion, whether it be Torghast or Island Expeditions. You're doing world quests. You're doing dungeons, raids, PvP, whatever it happens to be. You're doing everything. And that was the main philosophy that was really hammered on in Battle for Azeroth. I would say the most. And I think that what it's done is it's caused a bit of resentment for the players who have their own gameplay loop when they log in, but then that loop is disrupted because they're pulled into another loop forcibly to be able to accomplish the goal of the main loop that they want to do, and they don't want to be involved with that. They want to stay in their loop, right? And this is, maybe you could think of it as putting certain content in the game on islands. And then there's the whole controversy of, it's an MMORPG though. I don't know where we want to go into the definition of an MMORPG, because I've seen many MMORPGs that have things on islands that are separated from the rest of the game. What does that mean? Does it just mean only powering up the entire time? Because we've seen some really negative feedback towards that with Azerite power over time, and maybe even artifact power after a while of seeing it in Legion. So really, what does it mean? To me, it's how do we maximize the enjoyment of all the people that are currently playing WoW? And I don't think that the WoW is WoW philosophy, while it seems really cool and positive on the front, actually plays out the way that you would expect in practice, having implemented on it. So now moving forward, we'll just talk about the 5 in regards to that. And this isn't in any order. It's not that one type of player is better than another type of player or anything like that. But number 5 is the Completionist. Could also be the collector. So this player just wants to log in, and it could be any sort of subcategory of goal. It might be somebody who only cares about having all the mounts, only having all the pets, only having all the PvP achievements, only having all the raid achievements. It could really just only be oriented towards this like 100%ing, right? So having seen the recent video from Asmongold about the community council, he would be a good example of somebody currently, at least based on his opinion in the video, of a completionist. He wants to get all the mounts and all of that. And the types of things that are going to be of an annoyance to this type of player are certain raid bosses being impossible to solo from previous expansions, having mechanics that are just impossible to do, and stuff like that. If they're just constantly trying to go into that content to get that mount, but then there's this boss that prevents them from even trying to go to it, having things that are a little bit overly redundant. At this point, there's so many expansions that if you put a pet battle achievement to do 100 pet battles in Drana, or 100 pet battles in that zone, 100 pet battles in that zone, like the zones multiply now over multiple expansions. Might not be necessary to have that number so exceedingly high. I think it made sense for when all of the players were in that current patch trying to go for that number, but I think now that it's been strung out, you could be holding me wrong. Maybe there's a super try-hard completionist out there that likes having that, so it's a barrier for them to be above other players and stuff like that. And this list is although it's the 5 types, they're not entirely isolated. They may have a little bit of overlap. It's more like the spectrum of the 5 players. But for this, looking at going back into old content, making it more accessible for a solo player so that they can go after those specific achievements or those specific mounts, and reducing some of the redundancies and the volume of stuff that's just repetitive, I think is going to be in the right direction. And we've seen them doing things like that with changes to Mechagon moving forward. But and I think that they'll continue to do that. And this is a type of player that plays the game that might stay in only this loop. They might jump into the other types of loops that are in the game. But I think they are moving in the right direction in regards to this type of player. And they just need to basically keep it up. Now moving into the number 4, we've got the competitor. And this is kind of a broad name, right? Because you could be competing in anything in this game. You could be competing in parsing in raids for legendary parses. You could be competing in the world first race. You could be competing in AWC, MDI, these high level tournaments. You could just be competing to push your own personal rating in Arena or Mythic Plus. It doesn't have to be the grand scale. It could just be any sort of, your main purpose for logging in is improvement. You're trying to push forward in a specific area of the game. There's really only one player in mind that comes to me that would be multiple areas, and that was Trill when he was trying to win Race World First, trying to win MDI, and trying to win AWC all at the same time. Not many players like Trill. I think he might be the only one that was like legitimately like doing it and trying to pull that off. And that's like, that is going to take an immense amount of time. To me, the likelihood of success of that, like, I mean, if you want to take on that type of challenge, you can go for it. But I think for a lot of players that it's more like lanes. There's competitive lanes in the game. So you've got the raid parser that wants to be the number one parse in a raid. And anything that detracts from that, having to spend time even in a dungeon, which is shared PvE content, or having to spend time in something that isn't directly correlated to their benefit of improving on those specific raids, is going to feel like a little bit of resentment towards doing it, and you're going to be over time accumulate that, right? This is where the philosophy of WoW comes in at most, I would say. And then you've got people who do dungeons that want to be MDI competitors that now don't really want to do the raid because it's taking away from their practice time to focus in on the dungeons and trying to make sure their strategies are all nailed down, right? And then of course PvP, we've been complaining since the dawn of time about having to do anything other than PvP, and we see some movement now in Shadowlands. It's not nearly as it was in Battle for Azeroth, where people were farming Mythic Plus for dungeon gear, having to get into raids for trinkets, and having to come out into that. And this is where the debate of, well, it's an MMO RPG, should you have to do everything in the game? I think what we're seeing over time is that forcing players who like to focus in on these specific lanes likely causes them to quit, because if you're a competitor, you want to be the best, right? But if you don't feel like you have the time, or a lot of that time is spent in all this content that is redundant to the lane that you want to do, it's not that it's completely irrelevant or unjustified content. It's just not relevant to the one that you want to be the most competitive in. It's gonna be a deterrent, and it's gonna slowly pull you away, whether you become bogged down by the amount of time that's required of it, or just the fact that you don't like doing the other stuff in the other lanes. For me, I think that it would be a better direction to allow dungeon players to focus in on dungeons with their own specific sets of gear that are rewarded from dungeons, with dungeon specific bonuses, bringing back raid tier sets for the raid that benefit the raiders there and make their classes feel fun and cool in their lane, and then have PvPers with their PvP gear, with their PvP set bonuses for PvP to have their kind of experience moving forward, right? And then also having the world content again for the completionists. So having a zone like Korthia for the people who like going out and looting treasures and collecting mounts and doing stuff like that, and having that available for everybody to do when they want to, if they want to do everything, but not this kind of grabbing, like you'd have to do this or else you're going to be weaker in that environment, which means you're not going to be competing at what you feel is your best, which is always going to hold a bad feeling for you, no matter what. And then over time that accumulates. I think that's a bad idea. So we've seen some movement towards that now. And especially with in regards to alt catch up, like buying Valor boxes or buying Conquest boxes and being able to mail those to alts and slowly catch up your character. I think that's going to be important to please the competitor. That's the competitor player. And again, you might have some overlap. You might be a completionist competitor. You want to be the most achievements or whatever. So there's some overlap on this, but I think that this is one of the main types of players. Now, number 3, the fantasy. And what does this mean? This is somebody who basically plays for the story of the game, the lore of the game, right? That's what's most encapsulating to them. They like seeing the characters, like seeing the progression of the story, and almost as if it's kind of an interactive movie, right? A video game. This is somebody who isn't necessarily interested in min-maxing. They like seeing some cool stuff. They like trying weird stuff, clicking the stuff that looks cool. They might not even clue into a YouTube video or channel to try and min-max their experience. It's kind of just purely from the fantasy element of the characters in the game. And I mean, I feel like WoW, that's a little bit more subjective, right? If we're going to kind of critique whether or not the story is cohesive or encapsulating, right? And I haven't been the most in detail with that. I would consider myself more of the competitor type of player than the fantasy. I'm not even sure if I'm even a fantasy player anymore necessarily, but it's more about story. It's more about feel of the game. And it's really, in my mind, I would say it's maybe tough to displease this player if that's the only reason they're playing. You might have some people who they really captured by the story, but they're also competitors, so they'll get annoyed by the things in the competitor category. But this player, like, unless you completely toast the story, I find it pretty hard to find a way to make this player upset. But I guess you could, right? Maybe anything to do with lore oriented to that, but I don't pay the most attention to it, so I'm not really. If you're one of these players who really likes the story and something has happened with the story, then let me know in the comments down below. But again, that's way more subjective oriented towards the story element of the game. And that's number 3. Moving into number 2, we got the social butterfly. They think of WoW more like Facebook or Messenger. You're mostly just logging on to message your friends. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. You might have your own personal preferences to anything in the game, PvP, questing, dungeons, story, whatever it is, right? But your main purpose for logging in is that's your main social interaction with other players, and it's just all about messaging. So how is this doing? We've got communities, we've got guilds, right? We've got Battle.net. Is there really a way to improve this? I know for myself, I'd like a larger Battle.net friends list. And not have it be restricted as much, but this one isn't really as specific to the other ones, I think, that are having a huge amount of problems at the moment. This is more of just the social player, right? And I don't know if any of you are out there like that, but if you are, let me know in the comments down below. I'd like to know if you think I'm accurate with this list at all after we're done finishing it. So if you're one of those players down below, again, you might be a bit of everything, right? You might log in to talk about your friends, talk with your friends about your collection, or talk about with your friends about the story, or talk about with your friends with whatever you're competing in, right? So there is some overlap with this one to other ones, and maybe there are some people who only log in literally just to type to their friends and just fly around the world and do nothing other than that, right? But this is the number 2. And finally, the final one, the number 1, and this again, not in any particular order, is called the reward junkie. So this is somebody who plays the game to get upgrades. You want best in slot. You want that thing fully min-maxed. You want it upgraded, right? And it's only about the gear. It's only about the power of the character. It's only about the power progression. You could say that this, for a lot of people, would be the definition of the MMO RPG player. And I think that it has some conflicting elements, right, with the competitor. Because the competitor would care about being min-maxed. But if doing the activity to become min-maxed has nothing to do with their skill development and whatever lane they've decided to pick to compete in, then it will feel redundant, it will feel bogged down, it will feel repetitive. I feel like the Korthia Codex grind pre 9.1.5, right? You all understand what I'm saying here. So this one can go to an extreme, and I think that we've seen this one played out to an extreme for a while now, with things like Azerite power, always powering up your character, always needing to do something that powers up your character. And I think that we've seen that it has a downside, right? It has a glass ceiling, number 1. If you put out a grind for power that can never be completed, then when the patch ends or the expansion ends and then that currency is removed, the glass ceiling is shattered. So suddenly you're going to notice that, right, if you're playing for rewards. So this kind of prevention of getting to best in slot to try and perpetuate towards the reward junkie to always feel like they're getting rewarded in the content they're doing is the biggest conflict for the game right now. Like, hands down, the biggest conflict for the game. And if you are one of these players who's only playing for a reward, then Blizzard's in this position where you can never be satisfied. Because if they put a limit on it where you can reach your best in slot, if this is the only reason you're playing, this is the main type of player you are, you won't play the game anymore. But if they leave the grind limitless or reduce it down to like a 0.001% upgrade that's just infinitely dragged out over time, you might just become like, well, I can never finish this. This is, what am I doing? And then stop playing. So this is the toughest one to play around. To me, they can all play into each other, right? I think by having a reward structure for every category of the game, so like I already explained, raids, dungeons, PvP, having that gear specific with their own set bonuses that make that experience the best possible and allow the classes to be tuned more around those specific environments, allows players to focus on their dungeons, level up, and get the rewards. But I'm not sure if this limitless progression, the glass ceiling progression, is something that needs to be continued to be implemented on. And that's kind of the main one that I'm worried about with 9.2 is, are we going to see the Codex rep grind again? Are we going to see this kind of prolonged 0.5% conduit upgrade dragged on again, because I think that those systems are for this player, right? They're trying to satisfy that player that wants to focus on rewards and character progression. But now we're seeing both extremes. When the player reaches best in slot, they stop. When the player isn't able to ever get to best in slot, then they start to be like, what am I doing? Maybe some people still stay. That's why I left the word junkie. Maybe you still stay regardless to try and get to that upgrade. But I think focusing the rewards into the specific categories of the game so that players can still focus on their lane of improvement would go a long way towards easing some of the drawbacks that come along with trying to cater to this player specifically. But this is my list. This is my number 5, these 5 players. What do you think? Which one are you? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you a little bit of everything? Do you like getting some gear upgrades? Maybe not the whole reason, but you do like it. You know, opening up the vault and getting your sword feels cool. That's why I say it's a spectrum. You might be a bit of all of this. You might like collecting all the ahead of the curve achievements, which would make you a bit of a completionist. Maybe not the whole scope of the game, but in your specific avenue. You might like talking to your friends about all of this stuff. So you're probably a bit of all of this. But you may also be an extreme of only one of this, so it's kind of cool. That's just what I wanted to talk about in the video. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to tune in to me live, twitch.tv/Supatease every day at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're doing viewer games, so if you need someone to play with, or you want some help learning how to play the game, then that's a really good environment to come over to and have a good time. And other than that, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. Just lets you know when my videos go live. It helps me out a lot, and I do appreciate those of you that have subscribed and stay subscribed. So other than that, thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video.